XS Wireless Digital is the perfect wireless audio solution for content creators and filmmakers. Thanks to a 2.4 GHz transmission, XS Wireless Digital is a truly plug-and-play system that allows you to upgrade your in-camera audio with one-button operation. With a variety of configurations to choose from, this entry point into the world of wireless will improve your workflow and will expand the possibilities of how you capture audio for your video. For more information, visit sennheiser.com/xswd.
The new Super 35 sensor that Canon have introduced with the C300 Mark III is quite a big step up from other S35 sensors that they have created before. From the body and the flexibility that gives us in terms of the expansion packs and the interchangeable mount, to the sensor with its increased dynamic range for tackling scenes that possibly we couldn't have tackled or captured faithfully before, I can get more out of this camera. My money goes further. It's as simple as that from a business standpoint. From a creative point of view, it's unquestionably unlocking more creative avenues for us as filmmakers.
World Hi everyone, welcome back to ProAV TV, to our very casual, very informal little weekly Q&A sessions. Thank you so much for joining me for these. So as with every week, the way that these work, if you haven't caught one of these before, is this entire, I've got a little bit to talk about for the first sort of 5 minutes or so, nothing really, just mainly what has been happening, what we've released and everything in the last week. And then this entire hour-long session, well, might be 20 minutes, might be an hour and 20, depending on how many questions you've got. But I normally allocate about an hour for these on the average amount of questions. And we can just talk about whatever you want. So leave say hi in the chat, leave questions, topics, discussion topics, anything that you want to hear about or talk about in the chat here on YouTube or on Facebook, in the comments down below this video on Facebook, and I can see both of those places here on my laptop next to me, and we can just chat. So as for the last sort of week to get us started, it's been relatively slow week in terms of announcements and offers and things like that. There was a Hollyland offer on the Mars talkback system, which is now finished. But apart from that, it's the only real new offer that was going on this week, and no big new product announcements. The main thing that's happened today, actually, here in the UK, is that shops and everything have opened up. So we've made the decision to reopen our showroom space for customers to actually come in and visit. Now, this is in a very controlled manner, obviously, to be as safe as we possibly can be. This office that I'm in here is our central main office where the vast majority of our staff in all departments work. So we do need to be very careful and make sure that safety is of utmost importance in everything we do. But that being said, it is absolutely fantastic to be able to get customers physically back here in the building with the equipment and actually have some chats face to face with people. There's a customer in the other room behind me right now talking to Sam about some Blackmagic cameras. So if anyone is in the UK and does want to pop in and talk in person and see any of the equipment, please do get in touch. It's under a very strictly appointment only basis at the moment. So often, before COVID hit, if people came into reception, they could just sit and have a coffee in reception, and then we could take them through and we could have a couple of customers at a time in the showroom, much more casually. Whereas at the moment, to keep control of everything as much as possible, we're doing it on an appointment basis. So get in touch with us, we'll book you in. My colleague Sam handles all of the demos and the scheduling and the timetable, so he will book you in, and we'll get you physically back here in the building, because there's nothing quite like talking things through face to face, plus actually physically seeing a bunch of equipment around you. So please do get in touch if you want to do that. Content wise and videos wise, we released a video last week on the Pocket 6K Pro, which is part of my very slow released series of videos highlighting and answering all your questions on the Pocket 6K Pro. It's taking us a good few weeks to get around them all, but we're nearly there now. So this is the third of the series, the one on monitoring, and then there's one to come on sensors and image quality after this. But they are taking me quite a while to make, unfortunately. But this one is out. So we go over the monitor bits, the rear LCD screen, the EVF, just talking about what's new, answering any questions that you may have, and what difference it makes compared to the original. So that's worth a watch if you're toying up the idea of using a Pocket 6K Pro. And then this week we're working on a video for the little Lupo Kickass panel light, which if you haven't used Lupo lights, I really recommend that you go back through some of our other videos, have a little watch, look them up online, because they're a light that is, I don't want to say easy to overlook, but they don't get quite as much attention as a lot of the other lighting brands. And I really like Lupo lights. They do something very different to a lot of the other LED panels on the market. For the most part, they have these lenses in front of each of the LEDs. So it's not a Fresnel lens, it's just a focusing beam lens that's built into the grid here in front of the LED, which is why it looks like there's only sort of 50 LEDs or so on the front of this. And what that does is it really makes the light much, much brighter. Kickass panel is the smallest one. We've got the light that's actually on the floor behind me doing this red tint on the background here is their action panel. Let me bring this up here on the website for you. So this is the Kickass panel. The little on-camera one, then there's the action panel. And then if I go to LED lights over here and then limit it to just the Lupo ones, you can see all the others. But yeah, this is the light that started it all, if you like, the super panel 30. And then they've got soft versions, and then they've got bigger 2x1 versions. And they've got a whole bunch of lights as well as sort of Fresnel, proper Fresnel fixtures and like that. So the Kickass panel is absolutely the smallest one of the bunch. And I think it is really good little light. I won't go into too much detail because obviously we've got a video coming out this week on it. But it is essentially, I mean, it's an RGB light, obviously, but it's got far more punch and power than any other small little RGB light. Let me just boot it up to give you a rough idea. But yeah, that's it. So if I shine that down the lens, it's bright. I shine that at myself. It way overpowers the studio lights I've got here. Chuck it at the background. You can see how easy it is to just chuck a little splash of colour onto the background with it because of that extra brightness. It's 2,400 lux at 1 meter. So it's a really punchy, you know, that's 1x1 panel brightness, not little small camera brightness. I've got some other little lights down here, like the Aperture MC, for example, another hugely popular small RGB. Now, obviously, it's not a fair comparison at all. I mean, look at the size difference. The Aperture makes the Kickass panel look huge and chunky. But in terms of max brightness, you know, that's it in white color mode, so the brightest it can possibly get. And you see there, it's not overexposed my face at all. If I chuck that on the background, it's barely lighting that up at all. And if I go into RGB mode, it's going to be even. So that's a fair comparison with what that one was in. You know, it's barely doing anything on the wall at all there. It's just not quite bright enough to compete with the actual bigger lights that I've got here on. So it makes a huge amount of difference to how useful these RGB lights are. And yes, it's a huge amount bigger, but at the same time, this is still a tiny light. This isn't a 1x1 panel. You know, you can mount this on anything. You can chuck it into a camera bag relatively easily. It's not quite as pocketable as a little light like that, but it's still pretty impressively small, and it's going to be a very useful video light to have just in your camera bag, ready to go. So think of it almost like a bit of a get out of jail free card. You know, if you're going around doing interviews or freelance work and you don't know what situation you're going to find yourself in, it's so useful to have something like that just at your, even if you just keep it in your car and then you can just pop to your car and grab it if you need it. It is going to be really helpful. I mean, so that was in I showed you the brightness there in RGB mode. If I show you it in normal mode, it's even brighter. So in RGB mode, because obviously it's not using all of those LEDs, it's only using the ones for that particular color. It is 600, just under 700 lux, whereas in normal white light mode, it's 2,400 lux at 1 meter, which is pretty impressive. And as you can see there, it's well overpowering any of these lights here. You know, I shine it myself at arm's length like I did there with the Aperture, and I'm way overexposed. So it has got a decent amount of punch. So it is a useful little light to have. Right, let's crack on now with some questions, shall we? Some people, Video Editor Blokes joined us again. Thank you so much for watching this each week, Video Editor Bloke. I'm seeing your name. I think it's because your name is quite memorable as well. Okay, it's good to see you coming back. Okay, Paul M Films, another person who's watched it before. I recognise that name. Hi Carl, what kind of video features do you think the rumoured Fuji X-H2 should have to be competitive in a very crowded market? Very interesting question. I like that. So yeah, I mean, this is a great way to be talking about unreleased cameras. Particularly, so I don't know anything about the Fuji X-H2, and as this would work, if I did know anything, I'd be under an NDA and I couldn't talk about it anyway. But your phrasing there on that question, I very much agree with, in terms of what features would you like to see, not what do you think it's going to be or anything like that. What would you like to see for it to be competitive? I think that's a really good way to word it. Okay, so Fujis to me are all about having a super 35mm sensor and that mid-range between a large sensor size and a small camera body and those smaller lenses. I own a X-T3, and it is great to just be able to have it in my bag and carry it around with me on walks, and it's not like having a big Canon 5D around your neck or anything like that. It's a much smaller system, and that it's also quite cheap. I mean, the lenses for Fuji are really quite affordable lenses. And let's have a little look at the lens category for Fuji on the website, Fuji X Mount. You know, compared to EF or RF or Canon E mount lens prices, these are very affordable prices. You know, 35mm f1.4 lens for 430 quid. These are very good price lenses compared to some of the alternatives, and so it's a really good affordable system to get into, and so for me, the video users on that don't need to aim for the super high end. They need to prioritize the people who want to be taking good video wherever they are. So for me, autofocus is a huge one. They were one of the brands doing quite well with autofocus at the beginning, but then they haven't really pushed that much further forward in the last couple of years, really, and now have been massively overtaken by Canon's dual pixel autofocus because they've got cameras that now compete with the R5 and the R6, and Sony's, you know, A7S III and all of their phase detect autofocus is doing a fantastic job, whereas Fuji have sort of stayed at the same level. And so I would really love to see a new autofocus system from Fuji, which would really help it compete with the Sony cameras and the Canon cameras there. I think the XH system is the ones which had the stabilized sensor, right? Fujifilm. I'm pretty sure that's the way it was. It's the XT line, which is the one that I know the best. X Premium Compact, is that it? Or is it mirrorless? Here we go. Yes, XH1 was the stabilized sensor one, I believe. It's interesting they put the XT4 and the XT3 below this one on their website. But I'm pretty sure this is the one which has the stabilized sensor, though it doesn't say anything about it there. Image stabilizer, yes. Image sensor shift with 5-axis compensation. So yeah. I mean, basically, they just need to give it some of the features of the X-T4, but not all of them. So take away some of the stills, frames a second, and all the rest of it. Give it good autofocus and Super 35 stabilized sensor, and there will be a market for it. Even if it can't do as crazy frame rates and resolutions as a lot of the other cameras on the market right now. You know, even if it's just 4K 60, for example, as long as the price is good and it has those two things, I think it will be a decent camera. And also with Fuji, you never quite know whether they're going to include a headphone jack or not. It needs to have a headphone jack, especially if it's the video focused one. Cool, let's move on. So Video Editor Bloke was rewatching your and Philip Bloom's first chat on the FX6, and I couldn't work out if 10-bit color is only available on the XAVC-I codec and not XAVC-L. Also, how much more space do intro files take up? Right, so you can do 10-bit on... we didn't really go over a feature spec list in that chat, did we? We were mainly just big picture chatting about the FX6. So yeah, the answer is yes, you can do 10-bit in all of the codecs. You can do 10-bit in XAVC-HS, XAVC-L, sorry, there's no XAVC-HS. In either I or L, you can do 10-bit, and that's absolutely fine. And the interest files take up about 400 megabits a second rather than 150 on the L. So they do take up a decent amount more, nearly 3 times as much storage space. Okay, Cameron, loving your weekly live stream. Good to hear. Any thoughts about the Tilta float system and if there's any stock available? I don't think we have stock, but I don't know how long it would take to get from the manufacturer. I don't know a huge amount about the float system. Is it one of their big ones? Or OSC, it's their sort of steady, gimbal on a Steadicam type solution. I think it looks great. I mean, Tilta do some good stuff. Tilta do some really good stuff. I like that they're building it around other people's gimbals as well, because it means that it becomes, you know, DJI do such a great job with gimbals like the RS2, and that's what people want. So, you know, I like the idea of having this ecosystem around a gimbal that people might already have, or the one that they actually want to buy, and then adding it onto one of these really will make it a much more flexible system. Because the trouble with gimbals is that they take out roll and they take out pan and they take out some shake, but they don't take out any bounce. There's no verticality at all. Whereas with a proper arm system like this, arm stabilization, you can walk along and it will take out that vertical bounce as you're walking along. And so it just does a different thing from a normal gimbal. The other big thing is how long you can use it for. And you see people with easy rigs and the rings around their one-handed gimbals just to make it so that they can operate it for more than 20 minutes at a time. And something like this is a much better way of doing that, because not only does it mean you can operate it all day if you need to, but it means that it takes out that vertical bounce as well. Just makes it a better stabilization. I think it's much nicer to use than having a easy rig or ready rig or something like that over the top, because you're not going to bump on doorways and all that sort of stuff. And you know, it's going to get you better results while also being a very practical tool, which means you're going to operate all day with it. So I think this is there's a reason that Steadicams have been the way they are for such a long time, and it's because this idea just works. And sticking a gimbal on the top of it, as we've seen with gimbals like the Arri Trinity, for example, up at the very high end, it really works. It really does. So yeah, they're good, but we don't have stock ourselves. I don't know how long it would take to get one, but the sales team would be able to find out for you. So if you are really seriously thinking about buying one of them, get in touch and we will find out for you. Travis is saying, does ProAV ship to the States? If so, on average, how long would shipping take? We do ship to the States. How long it takes depends on very much on the item. What we've got on our website is a shipping calculator. So if you add something to basket and you go through to the checkout, you can estimate the shipping and everything down here. So if I click on United States, you stick in your postcode there and calculate your shipping, and that'll give you a estimate on how much it's going to cost. I don't think it will give you an updated time. It might give you an updated delivery time, but it will certainly give you an idea of how long it would cost. But I don't think anything takes a huge amount of time. You know, once we've got it here ourselves in stock, it shouldn't take too long to get it to the States. Okay, Video Editor Black is saying he currently has a lot of free time. Absolutely. I think a lot of people do at the moment. Hopefully, as the industry gets back together and lots more work starts going around, hopefully that will start to change. Cool, that's the end of the questions there. If you guys have got anything else you want me to be chatting to you about, let me know down there. I'm going to go back to Video Blog's initial talk on the FX6 and just chat a little bit more about that camera as a whole, because I think it's such an interesting camera. So the FX6 was one of these cameras where it really split people's opinion when it first came out, and you saw a lot of that actually in the Philip Bloom chat that that you mentioned there. Where I think when in that initial chat, I think I was a lot more keen on the camera than Philip was. Not because he wasn't keen on the camera at all. He loves the camera. In fact, he's swapping out his FX9 for one. But I think he is very keen on the A7S Mark III. Whereas to me, yes, there's some irritating things still about the FX6 compared to the A7S Mark III. I would work with the FX6 over the A7S Mark III any day of the week. And a lot of that is to do with the ergonomics. It's to do with the more finer control over the image, the noise reduction, all that sort of stuff. But so for me, it is worth the irritations in the user interface over the A7S Mark III. I mean, what would be perfect is if they can correct some of the things. All it needs is a slight tweaks on the menu redesign and some more touch focus functionality and things like that. And then it's going to be just as nice a camera to use as the A7S Mark III. Right, let's get on with some more questions. I can see some more coming in. Thank you so much for sending more in. Video Blog, any more plans for guest live streams? Nothing actually set in stone in the diary yet. But yes, we're always in the process of planning more. And if you want to see any in particular, let me know. One thing me and Philip have been talking a lot about since we were talking just about our chats with him is doing more regular streams. The difficulty is literally just finding time to come up with ideas. So if you do want to see me and Philip talk through anything, let me know. But beyond just that, we've got a whole bunch of manufacturers that we're working with, and lots of them are very keen on trying to get users to come on and do streams, which we've done fairly recently with some of our live streams. So let me just boot up our YouTube channel and go through our recent streams. Oh, not live now. Past live streams. So ones like this with Ollie Kensington talking about the power of colour and lighting. So sort of his project he did with light panels. Or ones like this one with John Edwards talking about some of his fashion commercial work, which he shot with the A7S Mark III and Zeiss lenses. Or Brett Danton. You know, this sorts of things I'm very keen to do a lot more of. Plus, of course, just the ordinary product overview ones that we do with manufacturers. We're just coming out the period of a very busy sort of couple of months of camera releases and everything like that. And so we hopefully are going to be able to schedule in a lot more. And we've seen a bit of that recently with things like these Blackmagic streams. I really enjoyed these Blackmagic streams, both the sort of more basic product overview ones, which I did with Chris here, and the bigger picture ones with Craig. I hope people watched those, but if anyone's watching this that didn't watch those, this one with Craig in particular, if you're interested in Blackmagic products, is well worth a watch. Craig is the technical sales director for Europe for Blackmagic, so he really knows his stuff. He's very much part of that inner circle of senior management at Blackmagic, and it was so great to be able to just sit down with him for an hour, pick his brains, and just chat about anything Blackmagic in terms of digital cinema. So please do watch that. Okay. RZ Experience, what do you think about the Sony A7C in video terms? As far as I know, the color science is better and it finally has no record limit and no overheating. It's a great little camera. It really is a great little camera. It's a great price as well. A7C. The reason I probably don't talk about it as much as I could do is simply the codecs inside it. It is still sort of very much Sony's 100 megabits a second XAVCS compressed codec, because that's what this camera is about. This camera is about speed. It's about being, I don't want to use the term entry level because we're still talking about a good professional camera here, but you know, in terms of their professional lineup, it's the entry level one in terms of their full frame of things anyway. That codec very much reflects that. And so for quick work, I love the A7C. I think it's a brilliant camera. I mean, like you say, no overheating. Does it finally have no record limit? I don't think I had heard that, but excellent. And in terms of color science, it's very similar to the A7 III. So it's essentially the same as the A7 III as far as I'm aware in terms of color science and codecs. But the autofocus is actually surprisingly good in it. It does really quite well in autofocus tests. They've got some good autofocus in that camera, which again, like I was saying with Fuji earlier on, perfectly reflects the people that are going to be using this camera, because small little entry-level professional mirrorless cameras, if you like, what they end up getting used for is people doing very, very fast-paced work. You know, solo shooting, just going out and about and trying to capture things as well as they can very quickly. And for that sort of work, autofocus at this kind of level is unbelievably useful. It really is a fantastic, fantastic tool. Okay. Dig Project says, is the A7 IV going to have comparable picture quality and low light to the A7S III and FX3? No, it's not. It's still going to have very good. It's not going to have anywhere near the low light. Definitely not, because the whole point of the A7S Mark III and then the FX3, because they share the same sensor, is that it's a low resolution 12 megapixel sensor so that it can let as much light into it as possible because it's got bigger pixels. The A7 IV, so that's the unreleased, I read that as A7R4. Who knows with the whatever the next camera might be from them. Because the A7 III actually was really very good in terms of low light, surprisingly good, nearly as good as the A7S Mark III. So I have high hopes for the A7 Mark IV. How they would then differentiate it between that and the A7S Mark III, who knows? We'll have to see. I'm very much looking forward to finding out. But yeah, we don't know enough about the camera to know whether it's going to be comparable picture quality. We don't even know if it's 1 year off or 3 years off. Who knows? Hopefully soon. But normal rule is for video, as you go up in resolution on the sensor, unless you are also going up in resolution to capture it, you're going to go down in terms of picture quality. So what might be very interesting is if they, for the A7 Mark IV and then the A7R lineup, and they do anything like they've done on the A1. So they give you a higher resolution sensor, but they also give you higher resolution capture modes, like the 8K mode on the A1 is unbelievably good. It really, really is. And so if they bring any of that tech further down, that would be very interesting to see. Very interesting to see indeed. Okay, Arcady says, any thoughts on the Panasonic HCX 1500 for recording of wedding ceremonies and receptions? Cheers in advance. Yeah, lots of those cameras are very good. So the HCX 1500 Panasonic. Which one is this? Let's just refresh my memory. So this is the one that comes without the top handle. I would always try and get the top handle one for wedding ceremonies and receptions because it's got XLRs, and XLRs are just such a fantastic audio connection to use. You can plug something like a Sennheiser AVX straight in, which is a great way to work for weddings. It has got a 1/2-inch sensor. It's not the one I would necessarily recommend. If you can stretch up to a camera like the CX350 in Panasonic's line, this would be a much better camera. There's then in the Canon lineup ones like the XA50, which would be good, which is maybe more of a similar price point. Reason I say that is that the Canon's got very good autofocus. It's got a larger sensor inside it as well, and so that might be a good one for you for that sort of work over the Panasonic. The Panasonic does have the edge in terms of codecs, though. It's got some good record modes in that camera. I can just see Ethan down the bottom has just put in, what camera would you recommend to my friend Anthony Viltari for filming adult films? Well, to be honest, any of those same sort of cameras I was just talking about then with wedding ceremonies and stuff like that. Any good camera will be fine. Film 4.2 TV. Is there a way to use Super 35mm lenses like the Fuji 18-55 on an FX3? Okay, so there's two problems there. The first one is the mount. The second one is the Super 35 part. So let's talk about the Super 35 part. First, the FX6 is a full frame sensor and doesn't have a fantastic crop mode in. So it does let you zoom a little bit using clear image zoom. It doesn't give you a 4K Super 35 crop mode like say the FX9 does, for example. So as a whole, the FX9 is a better camera for doing Super 35 using Super 35 lenses with, even though it is a full frame camera. On the FX3 you've got to use the clear image zoom, which people get a bit nervous about doing. So that's the Super 35mm part. The other problem is the mount. So you'll be able to use Super 35mm lenses on it. So say if you use a Metabones adapter and use a Canon EF lens or a PL lens or something like that, or even a Super 35 Sony E-mount lens, you're not going to be able to use Fuji's lenses because Fuji X-mount can't be adapted to Sony E-mount. You might be talking about the cinema version of the 18-55, so the Fuji non rather than the Fuji film, which is a Super 35 cinema lens. If you are, that works very well. Again, the FX6 is not the perfect camera for it because it doesn't have that high quality Super 35 crop mode. The FX9 is a better pair. But you can use it. We've got customers that are using it with that clear image zoom and are perfectly happy. And yes, that will mount straight on because that cinema one is an E-mount lens. Right, let's have a little sip of water. Let's answer one from Dig Project. As a follow-up, I'm torn between buying the FX6, FX3 and A7 IV. Need long record times and low light performance. I use the ATEM Extreme ISO with my cameras. Okay. So to me, the FX6 or the FX3 will be better choices for that sort of situation than the A7 IV. The FX3, you're going to be able to find make it easier to get a cage and things like that to lock the HDMI in. A7 IV, you're going to deal with auto shutoffs and things like that happen when you're using still cameras. The FX6 is I mean, the A7 IV doesn't exist. Dan's just reminded me. The A7 III, I assume you're assuming that an A7 IV is going to come out at some point soon, which we don't know. And Sony have released a lot of cameras recently. They're going to have to be nearing the end of how many cameras they've got up their sleeve at some point soon, surely. So for now, I'll just talk about the A7 III. The FX3, for example, or the FX6 are going to be great choices. Personally, I think the FX6 is by far the best camera on that list for video work, especially with long record times and low light performance. But I mean, the FX3 is very, very capable as well. So it really depends on the specific needs of each one. Okay, video editor bloke. I prefer chats like the ones you described rather than the straightforward manufacturer's presentation. The discussion really brings it to life. Well, that's why I try and make all of our content as chatty as possible. Blackmagic is one of the manufacturers that likes to do it a bit more manufacturer presentation, if you like. And so when we did Chris, for example, I just sort of left him to it for half an hour and let him do the presentation and then come back in at the end for questions. But I'm the one that insists that we would have that Q&A at the end, because I completely agree with you. I really like having a little bit of back and forth discussion, both with me and the manufacturer, and also with you guys and the manufacturer, so that what you want us to talk about, we can bring into the stream. And so that's a hugely important part. And for the most part, I try wherever possible with the manufacturer ones to bring in conversation and discussion points around each of the topics as we go. And so if you look back at any of the older ones that I've done, like maybe Bird Dog, or some of the Holden ones that I did, or Canon's ones, that's what I try and do. But for the more recent Blackmagic ones, we did just hang back and let Chris talk for half an hour. But yeah, that's good to hear that you do prefer it that way, because that is the way I always try wherever possible to do. Okay, one more follow-up. I'm also looking at a few Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4Ks. This is also Digiproject for the 8M setup. The camera control feature is worthwhile on the 8M to make it worth switching to Blackmagic cameras. It's a difficult one. So, it really depends on your specific needs. I mean, the camera control features on the 8M, really what you're talking about is the ability to shift focus forwards or backwards. You're talking about changing iris, and if you've got a power zoom, which there aren't many power zooms for the Pockets, if you've got one, you can zoom a little bit as well. You won't be able to pan or tilt, so it doesn't replace a normal PTZ camera in terms of capabilities and functionality. So it depends whether that is something that you would find useful. What the Blackmagics don't have, which is very useful, is the tracking autofocus. Whereas take the FX3 or the A7 III, for example, that you were talking about, you use one of those as one of your cameras, you're going to be able to let it track the focus on your subject. But you will have to set things like your iris and your ISO and everything like that on the actual camera, and then get back to your desk. So it depends what's more important, whether or not keeping focus during the stream is the important bit, in which case maybe Sony's the best way to go if you've got a subject that moves a fair amount. If you're doing a multi-camera shoot by yourself and it's more important that you can sit there at the 8M, look at the multi-view and check exposures on each one of them and sort of tweak them to match, that's when the 8M camera control stuff is really useful, because you can go, oh, camera 2's that little bit overexposed, let me just dial the ISO back, or let me close the aperture a little bit, and you can do that nicely. So for some things, like events is often the one. Quite a very common setup I've spoken to customers about for events is having a 3-camera setup for events with an 8M, and you've got one camera close to you which you're operating zoomed in and you're following the speaker with, and then you've got a wide and a sort of side or an audience cam, or maybe a mid that's locked off further around the side of the hall, and you're running all of them into your 8M. So you're cutting the 8M with one hand and operating the camera with another. And so for cameras that are like the one around the side or the wide, that's when it's really useful to have that 8M control and the camera control on the actual 8M itself. Film TV 42 TV did mean the Cine lens. Awesome, there you go. So yes, you can use the Fuji 18-55 MK Cine lens on the FX6, no problem. However, you won't be able to use the full sensor. Use clear image zoom to get around it, if you're willing to use clear image zoom. RZ experience and the crystal ball moment. Do you think Blackmagic will release a Pocket 4K Pro? I'd really hope so. I would really hope so. The 4K Pro, I don't know why the 6K got the Pro version and the 4K didn't. I like the 4K. I like that it's got a slightly smaller size. I like that it's got a smaller sensor that's better in low lights. I think it's a lovely camera. I really do. And I like that it uses micro four thirds lenses, and so it's a bit cheaper for people, because there's two sorts of customers that buy pocket cameras. There's ones which are trying to get as much bang for their buck but for medium-sized productions, and that's what the 6K Pro is great for. And then there's people that just want to get a good video camera, a more cinema camera, and they're really pushed on budget. And that's what the Pocket 4K has always been great for. And the Micro Four Thirds mount lends itself perfectly to that, because there's some really good affordable lenses for Micro Four Thirds. But those customers might want to pay a couple £100 more when they're buying the camera in order to get the features that came with the Pro, a tiltable LCD, an EVF. All of those things are just as important, whether you're that entry level, trying desperately to afford it kind of level point in your career, or whether you're at the more mid-range, the 6K Pro level. The changes that we saw with the 6K Pro are just as useful at both experience levels, if that makes sense. Okay, the greatest light one. Any thoughts on the A7R Mark III and the Mark IV getting an LCD screen upgrade? Yeah, leaving their flagship with a lesser resolution LCD. I don't know what my thoughts are on it, to be quite honest. I think it's very strange. It's very, very, very strange. Sony are saying, the official Sony line is, as it always would be, of course, is, well, we've got a better LCD, so we're just trying to give customers the best they possibly can. And that's all very well and good, but as you say, why aren't they doing that on the flagship? They've just released the A1. Why has the A1 got the lower resolution LCD, whereas the new ones have got the higher ones on the A7R? It's very strange, because the A7R 3 and 4 aren't at the bottom entry-level ones in their lineup. They are just there underneath the A1 in terms of their lineup at the high end. So they are still, they're not the flagship anymore, but they're still up there. They're still pretty high. And so it is a little strange. I mean, there's the argument that they're running out of parts and they've got a short supply of parts, so they just simply swapped over the R lineup to be using a different LCD display that they could get more of, which would make a lot of sense as to why they'd done that and then made that strange move, which for them as a manufacturer works, but for customers and for us is a bit irritating, because we much would have rather had it on the A1 to begin with. But it would be very irritating if just now with the A1 being released they've said, well, we can upgrade the screen. That would be very strange indeed, and we would have a lot of very annoyed A1 customers. So yeah, it is a bit of a strange move, and I'm not going to pretend to understand it or say, well, obviously it's because of this. I haven't got a clue, to be quite honest with you. I don't know what Sony are doing there. There's obviously something behind the scenes that we're not privy to. But at the end of the day, if you are buying an A7R Mark III or Mark IV, it is quite nice that those slightly older cameras now have got a little bit of an upgrade. If you're looking at buying one now, it probably also means that it's less likely that there's going to be a new one in that lineup imminently. Looks like an A7R Mark V, for example, isn't going to be announced in a couple of months' time, because otherwise would they really have bothered doing this? So it gives people looking at those A7R cameras now a little bit more confidence in what they're buying, and knowing that they are getting something that isn't going to be immediately replaced, hopefully, or one that keeps up with the other latest cameras. Okay, Cameron, any thoughts on the Kinefinity Terra 4K versus the Zcam and BGH1 from Panasonic? Yes, lots of thoughts. So, the Kinefinity lineup as a whole is a very it's easy to think that they are very similar to the Zcam and the BGH1. They're sort of not. They're very much designed from the ground up to be cinema first, if you like. So the Zcam and the BGH1 are both what I would describe as sort of hybrid box cameras. particularly the BGH1. You look at any of Panasonic's marketing about the BGH1 and it all goes on about how many different things the BGH1 can do. It can be a streaming camera, it can be a box studio camera, it can be a gimbal camera, it can be a cinema camera, it can be a drone camera. And the Z cam's very similar, you know, it's got RS422 ports on the back. It's much more designed around, here's a little bit of this, here's a little bit of that. The Kini cameras aren't that. The Kini cameras are cinema cameras. And everything about them really is designed in that way. You know, they are ProRes cameras. They don't have a smaller codec inside them than ProRes. They're for ProRes because they're for cinema capture. They had RAW in them, but that's now been taken out because Cinema DNG was not supported properly really on them in software. Their implementation, they were trying to move towards ProRes RAW, but that looks like it's been stopped by some behind-the-scenes patent work, which is a bit of a shame. But at the end of the day, I've been using Kinofinity cameras for years now, and I've always ever used the ProRes mode in those cameras. The ProRes mode is fantastic quality and exactly what I've been recommending customers to use. I mean, if you look at cameras like Arris, for example, the vast majority of productions using Arris aren't using Arri RAW, they're using ProRes for capture, and that's feature films, it's TV shows like Game of Thrones and things like that. You know, they were all using ProRes for the most part. And so lots of people go, oh, I don't want to use ProRes, I want to use RAW as if it's this thing that they need. And actually a good ProRes file, like Kinis have got, even the Kini Terra 4K has ProRes 444 in it. You know, this isn't ProRes 422. And that's all you get. You know, there's HQ, there's XQ and 444 as well, which is just incredible considering the price of the cameras. And with one of those files, you know, it's almost as if you do have RAW. You know, in fact, there's debates as to whether ProRes RAW or this will give you better results and more flexibility in post. You know, RAW isn't everything. It doesn't. Every RAW format is very different, and the way that each RAW format does its debugger is very different. And so just because something is labeled as RAW doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get better image quality. Does in some situations, doesn't necessarily mean it. And so the high quality ProRes 444 on the Kini cameras is not only going to be very, very high quality, it's also going to be universally accepted and universally understood. You know, you can give it to any producers, you can give it to any, they might not recognize the camera, they might not trust the camera because it's a camera brand that it's not Sony or Canon or Arri or whoever. But that file that they get, they're going to know what to do with that. They're going to understand it, it's going to be trusted. And so that does help a lot with those cameras. I also think the Terra 4K has the nicest image quality of those three there. I mean, Zcam do some very, very good stuff. But to me, they are much more bitty in some of their offerings, and each camera does some things and doesn't do other things and has lots of different options inside it, and you can go to these frame rates if you choose this, but you can't if you do this, and all that sort of stuff. The Kinis are very simple. They have their frame rates they can go up to in each flavor of ProRes, and that's it. Much simpler, cinema streamlined products, really. So yeah, that's my thoughts. And so which one's better for you really depends on the sort of work you do. If you're purely interested in narrative projects, I would recommend the Kinefinities over those other two cameras any day of the week. If you're looking at something that is more of a streaming camera or a studio camera or something like that, you could go Zcam, you could go Panasonic BGH1. Both are good options. I like the Panasonic personally because it has a little bit more control, and Panasonic as a brand are very widely used inside the streaming and multicam world, and so BGH1 just fits into that ecosystem quite nice and smoothly. But really, they are much of a muchness. And I think the Zcam does maybe a slightly better job at the more cinematic side of it than BGH1 does, because the BGH1's based around the GH5S, a little bit of an older camera, I suppose. But yeah, you're splitting hairs at that point. Okay, Small Brown Fox says, Carl, would you take a Fujinon MK18 to 55x mount zoom in as Part X? Personally, I wouldn't. The ProAV is the company, I'm sure would. We have a big second-hand department, so we can absolutely buy a Fujinon. As long as it's in a good condition and it passes the engineer's reports and the sales team are happy, I'm sure we would be interested in exchanging one of those for you. Cool. And that looks like a couple of people saying thanks. Judge and Cameron both say thanks for the questions. No problem at all. Thanks you for watching. So I think that's a good place to call it, really. Seems to be the end of some of the questions. There's some good questions there today, guys. Thank you. So yeah, look out for the video on the Kickass panel from Lupo. Awful name. I really don't like the name, if anyone from Lupo is watching. But great light. I love the light. Name, not so much. But yeah, the Kickass panel. We're going to have a video going out on that later on in the week. So keep an eye out for that. And as I mentioned earlier, the showroom that is here in our Hemel Hempstead office is now open for business, appointment only. So get in touch if you want to come in and physically try any of the equipment out. We now are able to do that after a good year of it not being allowed. It's great to see some customers finally in the showroom. So yeah, get in touch if you want to come in and say hi. And thank you all so much for watching. If you want to buy any of the products that we've mentioned today, of course, just head over to proav.co.uk or get in touch with our sales team and they'll be able to help. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching and I'll see you very soon. Bye.
XS Wireless Digital is the perfect wireless audio solution for content creators and filmmakers. Thanks to a 2.4 GHz transmission, XS Wireless Digital is a truly plug-and-play system that allows you to upgrade your in-camera audio with one-button operation. With a variety of configurations to choose from, this entry point into the world of wireless will improve your workflow and will expand the possibilities of how you capture audio for your video. For more information, visit sennheiser.com/xswd.
The new Super 35 sensor that Canon have introduced with the C300 Mark III is quite a big step up from other S35 sensors that they have created before. From the body and the flexibility that gives us in terms of the expansion packs and the interchangeable mount, to the sensor with its increased dynamic range for tackling scenes that possibly we couldn't have tackled or captured faithfully before, I can get more out of this camera. My money goes further. It's as simple as that from a business standpoint. From a creative point of view, it's unquestionably unlocking more creative avenues